Hello and welcome to the Trade Desk Groundswell Digital Festival. I'm Michelle Hulst and I'm EVP of Global Data and Strategy at the Trade Desk. And I'm really excited to be here with our guests moderating this discussion today. So given everything that's been going on in 2020, it's been a slightly crazy year. I think we can all agree. Definitely on the marketing front, marketers are being asked to do more with less. They're being asked to make all their ad dollars count as much as possible. And for most of those advertisers, it means prioritizing ad opportunities that are both measurable and comparable. And they really have to go verify their performance to their CFO. So I am really excited to be joined here today with this impressive group of experts who are going to share research, insights, and case studies on using data-driven measurement to prove ROI, which is just, as I said, imperative for our marketers today. So let me introduce our guests first, and then we're going to get into hopefully what is going to prove to be a lively discussion. So we have Nishat Mehta, who's the CPO, Chief Product Officer at IRI. Thanks, Nishat. And Jessica Hindlian, SVP of Product Management, Advanced Video Advertising and Identity at Nielsen. And we have Brett Schnittlich, who's President at Lucid. And thank you to all of you for joining. Like I said, I'm really excited about this discussion and excited to get started. For the audience who's listening in, please note that we're going to save some time at the end for any questions for you all. And there will also be polls running throughout our discussion. So please feel free to participate along the way because we'd love to hear your thoughts. So to start out, it's fair to say 2020 has not been our kind of standard typical year. A couple things have changed along the way. And how do you all think about that as it relates to brands and how they're thinking about measurement? Nishat, have you been seeing anything on your end?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so we work within the CPG space, which obviously did not necessarily see as huge of an impact as some other industries did, or if anything, the impact was actually somewhat positive. So we had advertisers continue to advertise through the beginnings of the pandemic. On the measurement front, we've seen a massive difference because we sort of looked at it in sort of 2 to 4 week intervals where the consumer kept changing, right? And I think we can all go back to the world as it was in kind of March, mid-March, through the end of March, where everything was just unknown and sort of panic. 100% increases year over year in terms of CPG purchasing, all the runs on toilet paper, et cetera. April was a lockdown month. May was a reopening in certain states, but not others, et cetera. And so what we've really taken away from this is measure frequently. The consumer has not changed more often in any previous year than they have in this one. And frankly, even today, 6 months after the beginning of the pandemic, we're still looking at situations where a month from now, things are going to be wildly different than they are today. Are people going to go trick-or-treating on Halloween? No one could predict that today because it's 35 days away. So measuring frequently is really the thing that we're beginning to see a lot more of.
Yeah, my kids are definitely anticipating going trick-or-treating on Halloween. So I'm trying to figure out how to break that one to them when that actually changes. But Jessica, what about you? What are you seeing on your side?
Yeah, so we're seeing, I hope you can hear me, my mic was a bit fuzzy. We're seeing that at a high level, there's a greater need than ever before for accountability, and there's a need to maximize investment, and that's only accelerated under COVID. We think that we're seeing the market shift to a more demand-based model, especially in advanced TV, where advertisers are really looking for increased flexibility with their investments, and that also means an increased focus on measurement as a result of that. So I also think separately that these trends that we're seeing and all the changes that are occurring in the market have really also led to a greater acceleration of advanced TV across the board, whether that's streaming or OTT connected TV, as well as linear addressable. And what's interesting is that those types of video are inherently more measurable. So I think it just kind of goes back to what we're all seeing happening right now in the market.
Yeah, we've done some research on that and just seen those trends, like you said, as we can all, I think we've all experienced as consumers too, moving to more addressable television throughout this pandemic. But we've seen the data back that up too from a measurement standpoint. So
I have some great Nielsen stats to share too.
Oh, good. Okay, well, let's make sure we get to those for sure. Brett, did you have anything to add there? Or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first I want to double down on what Nishat said earlier. There's no doubt that, we're seeing change of consumer sentiment at a rate that we've just never seen historically before. And, the other thing that kind of goes through my mind is this concept that really every impression matters, So we've got consumers that are changing their opinions constantly because of what's going on around us all. At the same time, we have certain advertisers who are definitely throttling back on spend. So, in a world where sentiment changing, the actual reach of advertising down because of the amount of traffic out there, the importance of making sure that each impression matters is even more important than it has been in the past.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And Nishat, when we were talking, we were catching up earlier on some of the research that IRI is doing and some of the trends that you're seeing emerge, which is just stuff that's really different than we've seen in past years due to the pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about some of the research that you've done and what you have seen?
Yeah, there's a number of things that we could talk to, but I think there are two that are maybe most striking to me. The first is just related to new buyers. We saw just a massive amount of sort of brand shifting, especially in the sort of months of March and April. And we've begun to run some campaigns against new buyers. Roughly, I think on average, the average brand saw 30 to 40% of their buyers in March and April as new buyers, people that had not bought the brand in the 52 weeks prior. And so we ran a number of campaigns against new buyers. And in general, new buyer campaigns don't work very well. People might try a new brand because they couldn't find the brand they liked, but frankly, as soon as they can get back to the brand they like, they go back to it. And so new triers rarely, it's hard to get them to repeat. And yet we were seeing returns on ad spend that are multiples, 2 to 3 times as good as typical new buyer campaigns return in the sort of months following COVID. We think a lot of that has to do with people's loyalty towards brands have probably decreased as a result of a host of things. One, just out of stock and supply chain issues. Frankly, I don't really care about the brand of toilet paper or paper towels in my house. I just need them. And I think that's continued. And then I think there's also been potentially some discovery that was surprising. Kraft mac and cheese may not actually be the sort of bad for you that I thought it was when I was growing up. It's actually changed quite a bit and tastes pretty good. The second thing that we found that was interesting, we've probably run about 50 or so measurement studies on campaigns that have run since the week of March 9th, which we sort of look at as the beginning of the official kind of panic and sort of the average consumer beginning to understand what we were about to enter. And across those 50 brand studies, the average lifts that we're seeing for those campaigns are less than half of our typical benchmark lifts, for the 1,000 campaigns that we've tested in the 2 years prior. And that one's an interesting one to us because it would imply that marketing isn't working as well in times of COVID, and therefore it becomes important to sort of make sure that you're getting everything about the campaign correct in order to make sure that the marketing is actually working as well as it can.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's one that's not super intuitive, until you start to go through the data, which is interesting. The first point, I think we definitely saw that in our household where stock was out. And so you try something new and you're like, oh, I actually like this. And it'll be interesting to see what that does to consumer behavior going forward and also how brands react to that, because they have this consumer now that's tried. Now, how are they going to retain them going forward?
There's definitely a message we've been in market with, which is there's no amount of advertising spend you could have spent to get the kind of trial you've gotten in the last 2, 3, 4, 6 months. And so take advantage of it. If there is an opportunity to take advantage of anything about this year, this would be it.
Yeah. This is there are definitely the silver linings coming out from a marketer standpoint for sure. Brett, you all have done a lot of research. I mean, we're in a political year, as we all know. If anybody doesn't know that, we're in trouble. But you've done some research there. What have you seen kind of coming out of that research?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We got an opportunity to work with a combination of UCLA and Nationscape, and I believe, these are the words that have been told to me, but I think we're running one of the country's largest political polls on our platform right now. So north of 500,000 people are being polled on a regular cadence The goal being able to dive down into not only into the DMAs, but to get granular at the DMA level, to be able to provide some real insights. And, I kind of go back to it's an interesting intersection of time. We're in the middle of a political campaign, and in the past few years, there's been the advent of tools and techniques that allow you to do political polling at end sizes that would have been literally unaffordable in previous campaign cycles. So, and then combine that with some of the things you were saying before, guys, about the way that consumer sentiment is changing. The same things happening obviously in political situations. So being able to see shift in sentiment on, things like policing and protesting, but all the way down to elder care, and how those positions are shifting on literally a daily or weekly basis, and the ability to provide the campaigns with that kind of analysis down to the DMA level, I believe are things that have never been able to have been done before.
Yeah, that's really cool. There's so much, I'm sure, like coming out post election too. I'm sure there'll be all kinds of insights that'll come out of that too. Jessica, you were mentioning CTV earlier and that you had some good stats.
Yeah, I do.
A little bit about some of the stuff that you're seeing.
Sure. I'd be happy to. So Nielsen's done a lot of reporting over the last few months on just usage and, what changing consumption patterns look like across video. And we've seen a number of emerging trends. I think we all know that connected TV consumption is up. That's not news to anybody. But what we've been able to drill down to understand is that, if you look at this usage or consumption pre-COVID versus post-COVID, it's the share that has really changed a lot. So, pre-COVID, OTT and CTV was at 18% of total viewing. That has now jumped in this post-COVID or still COVID world that we're living in to about 28%. And that's a really interesting jump. So, with that in mind, we've also we've looked more broadly at total minutes of consumption. And we've seen that, overall connected TV usage peaked in April, which is a little bit interesting. So there were 4 billion minutes that were streamed each week in April. And that's normalized a little bit. We've seen that number dip a little bit, but it's still now at 3 billion minutes that are being streamed per week in July. So that's a 25% lift year over year if you look at July 2020 versus July 2019. So when I think about that, I take a step back and, it seems clear to me that connected TV audience measurement really has moved front and center because of the new importance on connected TV and connected media. So to me, it means that buyers and advertisers really need to know where their viewers are consuming video and how they can actually control in these new environments for unique reach as well as frequency in order to be able to measure effectively. And that's that's what we're seeing most broadly.
Yeah. And how do you think about a marketer, how they can leverage management to really kind of shape a good strategy, especially during this time, right, where we're experiencing massive disruption in the market?
Yeah, I think, when I think about general media and then I think about TV, I think the changing television environment has really allowed for more opportunities to measure, if you will, given the different types of TV and different types of consumption that consumers are now engaging with. I think that's really important because it's still clear to me that that TV really does occupy in the case of many brands, the largest share of their investment. That's not true across the board, but for a lot of the top 100 advertisers, that certainly is true. And so I think, as we think about that, we need a couple things. There's measurement that informs a good strategy from a pure brand measurement standpoint. And then there's really outcomes and understanding, how those two pieces play interchangeably together. Measurement in my mind really becomes the decoder ring. So it allows you to really look at transparency, comparability of metrics, and quality to inform further investment. So you really need that as your baseline. But then I think that when you're talking about attribution attribution and you're talking about outcomes, outcomes really occur at multiple levels of the customer journey. So, it's everything from building awareness to signing up to a website or, signing up for a test drive request that ultimately lead to that purchase being made. And, if you just focus solely on ROI and don't focus on these different areas as well, I think you lose sight of how you actually build and nurture and improve the process of acquiring new customers. And I think that that's something that we're thinking a lot about right now. I mean, we know, for example, based on some research that we've done internally, that 80% of the buying decisions generally are influenced and informed prior to that last click or the last minutes spent in the grocery aisle. That's probably changing given the environment that we're in right now. But generally speaking, these different forms of measurement, I think, really help to inform a better strategy going forward. And they really serve to inform almost a more optimization-like approach to media investment. And that's really, I think, what we're driving towards.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Brett, your company takes a slightly different look, right? Not into ROI, but more in brand lift. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and also, as I'm listening to the conversation, I come at this from such a different angle as a technology company and not the researcher amongst this group. But I'm gonna pivot off one of the words you just said, Jessica, which is optimization. I'm really beginning to see, we've had a vision for quite some while. I mean, it was one of the founding principles of when we built our platform that, what was done with the information gotten from the research process tended to be not necessarily, and there was no capability of real-time optimization. That's what I'm shooting for here. There was no capability of real-time optimization. And, one of the founding concepts of building the tools that we've built is that, number one, they were real-time. So the ability for, whether it's simple things like media mix, just saying, where is my campaign performing better than other places, and actually having the results coming back in real time, not the PowerPoint, that comes 30 days after the campaign closes. But what's been really interesting has been watching companies such as the Trade Desk and others that are leveraging the signal coming back from research, and again, using that for real-time optimization, not just consuming the data in large amounts and then processing it, but actually being able to deal with it in real time. So as a campaign is in flight, we have the ability to perform better.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll take the other half of the answer, Brett, in the sense of the sort of the brand piece versus the kind of the purchase or the action, if you will. I think one of the things for us, I go back to the comment I made earlier around, lift being roughly half of where it has been used to being. What we've also seen, though, is if you dig a little bit deeper, certain tactics within a campaign actually perform better. So not in every campaign, but in a number of campaigns, we're finding that desktop is actually outperforming mobile, unlike any time previously. And again, that's not universally the case, but one might assume that we're all spending more time in front of physical desktops. Ads are bigger. They're easier to consume. They're not as annoying because they don't cover up the content I actually care about on a mobile device. And as a result, they might actually have more of an impact on my subconscious, certainly, and potentially even my conscious. So for me, I think the real sort of strategy here needs to focus on granularity, that a measurement can provide a top line number, but what's really interesting, or what should be interesting to most marketers, is the thousands of individual experiments that can be done inside of any single campaign if you're measuring at the household level or at the sort of cohort or segment level, and leveraging that to understand what does and does not work and using those as learnings for future campaigns.
Yeah, and just kind of following up, it's not just, you had mentioned the concept that one creative might be performing better than another creative, but we're also seeing, a particular publisher or a particular placement performing significantly better than another the marketer having that information so they can actually do something about it while a campaign is going on, I think is just super powerful.
Yeah, it's interesting. It'd be interesting to see if there are trends emerging there too, like with certain placements that are really resonating, and if it's resonating differently now, than in other times. I'm sure there's just so much data come out of the disruption we're seeing right now. And how does that shift going forward too, as we think about consumer behavior? We don't swing the pendulum back to just, pre-COVID, right? It's going to be a different situation even as we emerge from this pandemic also. So much to unpack. One thing that we think about too is the role of identity, because that's obviously key kind of to making cross-platform measurement work. And just throw one more thing into the mix with third-party cookies potentially going away. So how do you think about measurement kind of in that post-third-party cookie world or universe?
I'll grab it. I'll grab it. I'll start.
Don't be shy.
Don't worry about it. Listen, I'll make it personal for a second. I mean, I'm a geek. I downloaded iOS 14 the day it came out, and immediately needed to go down the rabbit hole and check out all the features. And one that was obviously, intriguing to me was this whole Safari was going to expose and block potentially a tremendous amount of the tracking that was out there. I don't know if you've done it yet, but it's. I think for the people sitting around this table, and probably the majority of the people that are listening right now, they get it and they understand all the trackers that are out there. But one of my home pages is the Weather Channel, because I want to see what's going on, and there were 170 trackers and it's right there and exposed from literally every company that's sitting here, as well as ones that I've never heard of. That bright light is going to be shown on what we consider normal techniques.
Right.
Now, whether that's for trafficking campaigns or whether it's measuring campaigns, the act of tracking the way that we have via cookies and device IDs and everything else, we're used to it. The consumers, I believe, are going to start to see this as kind of a big brother thing. And I'm curious as to what the impact is going to be. And listen, I can go down a lot of rabbit holes here, but I think it's incumbent upon companies like ours to provide solutions. I mean, listen, there's the walled garden of Facebook. There's the walls that are building in front of that company that had that tagline of "We do no evil," but the walls are getting taller. But then there's the rest of the world. And making sure that whether it's server-to-server integrations or the appropriate API integrations between organizations, that we can fluidly measure, but also do it in an ethical way, in a way that allows the consumer to understand what's happening, have them opt into it. I don't think there is we go back to a world. It's just going to continue CDPA, GDPR, at iOS 14, lack of cookies, ads data hub. This is a trend that will continue, and it's incumbent upon us to find the appropriate solutions that provide the visibility required for the consumer, yet the trackability required for us to be able to do the jobs that we need to do.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And it's really, when I think about it, I mean, one of the things we're focused on at the Trade Desk is launching this Unified ID 2.0 initiative, which is really about helping educate consumers on the value exchange of the internet, because I think that's just missing right now. But also really being consumer first in the approach. I think all of us as companies in this industry need to be thinking about what's the consumer experience and how can we help make that better, and also help educate the consumers along the way. But Jessica. You want to jump in?
Yeah, yes, lots to, I feel like we could talk about this forever.
Yeah.
I think, you know, at a high level, I think, honestly, taking a step back, what the recent Chrome and iOS announcements to me should really potentially show us is that marketers can now start to take more control over owning and curating their own data. And I think that that's something that everyone's thinking more about. I feel like the preponderance of first party data that's living out there in the universe and zero party data as well, consented zero party data, are going to become even more important when you think about identity from an overall graph standpoint and the components of it. And I think that, you know, potentially what we see as, you know, this whole ecosystem evolves and as we see iOS 14 take shape and Chrome going away, which, you know, hopefully we have a little bit more time before, you know, the cookies are gone. But what I think we might end up seeing actually is a little bit of a contraction of the scale of a graph, you know, from an actual like device level standpoint. And there are ways that we can address that. And I think one of the ways we can address that is by making use of different types of data that we really haven't, you know, been able to pull in together to date successfully. And I think that, to Brett's point, you know, server to server, that's certainly a really good, you know, a really good solve for some of these issues that we're seeing here. You know, I think we all know that the reach of walled gardens is not really all that unique. You can find the same consumer outside of those environments. So it's about being able to really identify and measure that entire deduplicated reach across video inventory supply sources. I mean, that's really, to me, the role that identity plays in helping us to stitch all these pieces back together.
Yeah, I'd just add maybe one other thing. I completely agree, I think, with what both Brett and Jessica have mentioned. I think one other thing that we probably all, many of us on this call today, many of us, you know, in the audience as well, I think part of the reason why this has felt a little bit like, you know, we just constantly get sort of hit with left hooks is because whenever something happens, GDPR, CCPA, iOS 14, you know, Chrome, many of us do the absolute minimum we can to meet the regulation and then move on, which ultimately just means that when the next piece of regulation comes on, whether it's government regulation or self-regulation, we now have to make some other changes to accommodate that. And I think to sort of get out of this little, I don't know, cat and mouse game or whack-a-mole, whatever you want to call it, there's a part of me that almost feels like we need to start thinking about, like, long-term, 10 years from now, what will the consumer expect in terms of how their data gets used? And I think we all probably have a sense of what that North Star looks like. The consumer expects to understand completely how their data is being used. The little, to your point, Brett, also a geek that downloaded iOS 14, but the little orange and green lights that now show up whenever my camera or microphone are in effect. Fantastic. Like, it's a great new feature. So that's one, right? The consumer needs to understand when their data is being collected and why. The second is that the consumer needs to understand what value they're getting for the data that actually is being collected. And to me, we could go on, there's probably 3, 4, 5, you know, more things that are sort of North Stars. But to me, it's incumbent on all of us in the sort of marketing tech space to better understand what those North Stars are and start designing for that future, even if that future is not here today. I sometimes reduce it down to sort of, I joke with my team about calling it the mom test, which is sort of this idea that if you could explain to your mother why I needed her data and how what I'm doing with it is actually going to benefit her, then that checks the box. If I can't, you know, and my mom is, maybe some of you have mothers that are in the marketing tech space, my mom is not. And that's sort of the reference, right? Does the average layperson understand why we're collecting their data? Because if they don't, we can bet that they're going to get some proposition on a California ballot one day, or they're going to work for Apple and at some point enforce, you know, iOS 21, that's going to change the things in their favor. The consumer always gets what they want. It's a winding road, but they will get what they want eventually.
I think that's so true. Those are great words.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm gonna pile on here because I think this is a really important topic. You know, you mentioned the whack-a-mole, and that's a phrase that goes through my brain all the time. That's not the solution. You know, that's not what we should be doing. Obviously, this is not like here's the next hurdle that we all have to get over and solve for. but making sure that we create that North Star, which is imperative, but that North Star that is consumer focused, which is imperative. I'm very curious, because one of the things that I worry about a little bit is in the zeal to get that done by lots of different companies. I think one of the challenges we all have to check ourselves on is to make sure that we don't accidentally create more walled gardens and wind up with series of walled gardens all over the place, and actually have created a worse situation for the consumer and a worse situation for marketers and a worse situation for measurement organizations. I think we just have to be very, very careful as we kind of navigate this world.
Yeah, I love that. It's so true, right? Because best intentions and then end up creating, you know, a worse environment. So we definitely need to be cognizant of that along the way. I think that's great. Going to switch to one more question, then we'll go to the audience to see if they have any questions. But what's the number one thing you think that marketers should focus on going forward to really help prove ROI? Jessica, I don't know if you want to kick off or.
Sure. Happy to kick off there. So it's really hard to think of only one thing. I just want to start by saying that I feel like there's so many different answers that, and things that marketers should be thinking about as we move forward in this new environment. But I think primarily what I would say is, if you focus on analytics, what we've seen in some internal research that we've done, particularly with CMOs recently, is that we've seen on average about a 7x ROI for marketers that have really invested in the right analytics tools versus what it actually costs them to stand up that, the analytics platform that they're using. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity there still. And I think that kind of dovetails into the rest of what I would say about what they really should focus on right now, which is we can't forget that, and this goes back to the last discussion topic, but we really can't forget that in order to be able to execute and measure, everybody needs strong identity resolution, because we have to stitch all these disparate data sets back together in order to perform measurement. And then the last thing I would say, Michelle, and I know this is more than one point, but it's so hard to say just one thing.
You can make more than one point at a time. Yeah.
is that marketers really should look carefully and thoughtfully at these changing habits that we're seeing in media consumption in the landscape. I believe that more consumption equals more opportunities for brands to connect to the right audience. And it's just a matter of using the right tools to do that. So, I think that's the opportunity. But again, focusing on analytics and really and starting there is a good place to start.
I think maybe I'll jump in. I mean, building on that, I think, Jessica, the focus on analytics, the focus on sort of, we have the sort of the age-old argument of deterministic data versus probabilistic data. And we think, if anything, the last 6 months have taught us that models can break down. Any model that is attempting to predict based on prior 52-week behavior in the month of April this year would have been worthless, because my behavior in April, as I'm sure everybody on this call, our behavior in April was nothing like the prior 52 weeks. Funny story inside of our company, we tend to think about retailer loyalty. How do I know that you're very loyal to a particular retailer? And one of the mechanisms by which we do that is there's a handful of UPCs that frankly everyone buys, right? Toilet paper, toothpaste, laundry detergent. And do we see you buy those from that retailer? Because then that's a pretty good sign that you're clearly going to that retailer for at least your basics. I'm not sure if I'm unique. I don't think I am, but I don't actually believe we've made a toilet paper purchase since May. Because we bought so much during the March and April timeframes. And frankly, I'm not sure we will need toilet paper purchases for the next 3 or 4 months. So by that token, a model that is built on assuming that where I buy certain key products determines the retailer that I'm most loyal to would actually get that wrong in this world. And so I think this notion of the consumer changing and maybe the consumer no longer being able to be identified based solely on their prior behavior or a machine learned model that attributes certain things to a prior probabilistic behavior, we've got to rethink what that looks like and focus much more on near-term deterministic behavior as we build models for what consumers look like.
Yeah, and I also have trouble with the one thing, but I'm going to do my best. And I'm just going to go to an old adage, measure twice, cut once. Your consumer behavior changing, marketing spend changing, using the agile tools that are at the marketer's disposal today. That age-old concept of, before you make the snip, measure twice. Make sure you're reaching the right person. Make sure you're using the right deterministic data instead of probabilistic data to make your choices. Make sure your campaign is creating the effect with the consumers that you hope it's creating. Measure twice, cut once.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I'm going to weave in an audience question here that's related, which is, do you think we're getting better at measuring metrics that matter? And so thinking about, are we moving away from last touch attribution and everything? Are we making progress there, or are we kind of still stuck in our old ways?
I think we're, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jessica.
I was just going to say, I think we're trying. I think what is going to happen actually with the demise of the third-party cookie is that we're going to be forced to do more in that area. And I think that that's really going to change everything from that standpoint. I really do believe that this is an opportunity right now. The moment that we're living in is actually an opportunity for marketers to increase investment and to gain share of voice in their categories where that makes sense. So I think that there is a lot of room here for us to do a little bit better, but I think we're making progress towards being better at getting past last click. And I think one example I would share of that actually is we've seen this recently with some local addressable television advertisers of the automotive category, frankly. I mean, they were able to pivot really quickly when COVID happened because they run so much addressable media on video across the board, whether it's CTV or, just MVPD addressable and whatnot. But they were able to pivot and really start to do much more test and control and really look more at creative and shift things up and move things around much more quickly. And that has had a positive impact on measurement, and it has really moved the needle in terms of them being able to do more with measurement now versus they did what they could do a year ago even.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to jump in here as well. I mean, I think, measurement is always evolving, and I think there's a risk in throwing away what used to be the things that you considered important. And I'll give you an example here. CPG, again, is a space that we tend to focus most on. CPG has very often been focused on intent metrics, brand equity metrics, things along those lines. And we've been on a mission to try to help CPGs understand how you can actually connect purchase data to marketing outcomes and ultimately leverage sales data as the actual metric. The challenge we're facing now is, and going back to something Brett said earlier around optimization, is if you're optimizing to purchase, you're optimizing to purchase during the campaign, maybe plus a 2 or 4 week lag period. That pretty much optimizes to a world where no one focuses on brand building. And I think we would all agree that that's not a good outcome either. And so when we talk about whether measurement is sort of progressing or getting better, it feels like it's an and, not an or. We're not going to replace brand equity metrics with purchase metrics. In fact, it's the combination of the two and some sort of customer lifetime value metric that the two of them combine to form, which is ultimately what we probably want to be measuring. And the answer to that is yes. I think we're beginning to realize all of the things we can measure and then trying to put them all together to figure out the pool of metrics that ultimately determine a successful campaign.
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of double down on where you're going. I mean, as the non-researcher of the group, I'm still fascinated by how some very, very old school techniques are still considered literally the industry standard of how you do things. And they have not changed, some of these, in 50 years. The world has fundamentally changed, but the metrics haven't. I'm starting to see glimmers of this, and I'm sure you guys are too, but I'm really looking forward to a world where measurement is not the thing that you do as the checkbox afterwards. It's not the thing that you did that like, okay, we did our campaign, we did our job, here's our viewability, here's our brand lift, here's all the things. But when that data, because that's a tremendous amount of very valuable, deterministic, declared first-party data, zero-party data, that is being collected, and that being able to be used in real time to actually inform. So it's not just the machines doing the things with creating probabilistic models that quite honestly are built on probabilistic models, which is really scary, but actually being able to utilize that zero-party data in real time to create better models that are more predictive and tie the world of advertising targeting with the work that we as measurement organizations are doing.
Yep, that makes a ton of sense. One audience question that's tangentially related, and then I'm gonna move on. We have a ton of questions coming in, but we'll follow up later too, because we're gonna run out of time here. But what do you think will happen to MTA, to multi-touch attribution? Any thoughts on that? Anyone want to weigh in? Nobody wants to touch it. That's okay too.
It's we're interested in it. I mean, we know it's certainly got maybe a reputation that isn't as stellar as it should be, but we do think the technology is better today than it was years ago when sort of MTA first launched. We do think in an industry where the actual sale takes place most often today, still in an offline capacity, there is a much better chance of getting it right. The concept of last touch attribution is hard in a CPG world because there isn't a logical click from a television ad or a desktop ad you saw to a visit to a grocery store. And so we do believe it's certainly for the CPG industry that there is actually a market for MTA if done correctly. In some sense, it helps to start unifying traditional forms of measurement like marketing mix with your traditional sort of attribution sales lift type work.
Yeah, maybe I'll just start tying everything together going
Correct.
forward. Okay, well, let's move on. Thanks to the audience for questions. Like I said, we have a ton here. I tried to weave some of them in. We'll try to follow up with some of these other answers too. But I just want to hit on a quick speed round before we close. And so just one word, couple word answers, whatever your quick thoughts as we go through. So the first one is, and do we have to pick an order here? Maybe we do Jessica, Nishat, Brett, and then then you all can answer in that order. What are you most excited for in the measurement space in the coming year? Jessica, you can go first on that one.
I'm excited to see actually what all of these changes that we've been talking about with device identifiers, what that actually means for measurement longer term.
Yep, I think that
I'll
makes
build
sense.
on that. Cross-channel, Jessica's mentioned it a number of times, but just help me understand, like treat the consumer as somebody that's hit by multiple different pieces of advertising and help me understand the combined impact on that one individual.
Love it.
Real-time optimization and putting the consumer first.
Great, great. What's your prediction for if or when third-party cookies will go away? When do you think, time-wise, or will they not? Will they remain?
Maybe 12 to 18 months.
Okay. Good hedge.
I'm not too worried about that. Maybe I should be, but I believe Google in particular and potentially Apple will wait to make sure that there is an acceptable alternative. May not be as good, but good enough. So I'm almost not too worried that when it goes away, because it will go away by definition when something else is possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree and agree. I think in 12 to 18 months, we'll see the decline go rapidly, but I do believe that we'll see the alternatives start to pop up in the same time frame.
Perfect. Okay, the answer to this last one is going to tell me a lot about your outlook on life. 2021, do you think it's going to be better or worse than 2020?
Way better.
Please say better. Please say better.
Way better.
I'll tell you on November 4th, and a quick plug to everybody on the call to please go vote.
Thank you, Nishat. That is so true. Everybody go vote. Good point.
Yes, I am hopeful for a better 2021, and yes, thank you, Nishat, for saying that. Go vote. Every one of us.
Great. Yeah, we'll leave on that. I think that's a really good point to end with. Everybody go vote, help get out the vote. It's so important, more important this year than than ever. Thanks to all three of you for joining. I love this discussion. I was so looking forward to it, and you did not disappoint. So really appreciate it. That is a wrap for day 2 of the Trade Desk Groundswell Digital Festival. But we do have more interesting discussions tomorrow, so please join us tomorrow. And we're going to be talking about things like identity, employee engagement, and our closing session on the way forward for brands. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.